So this week we're looking at environmental politics. If you're looking at throughout the course of the 20th century, but certainly the last 40 years, we have this industrial production, these large-scale economic activities which underwrites global capitalism, which certainly have also produced collective bads. So we have this massive industrialization, certainly North America and Europe for over 200 years. Then we have newly emerging economies in the global south. Everybody wants to catch up and have the same sort of living standard Europeans and Americans and other Western countries had for a very long time. But it also comes with collective bads. Now, collective bads, basically, we're looking at common pool resources. A territory which doesn't fall under any country's sovereignty. We're looking at the ozone layer, the atmosphere, the oceans, different aspects of wildlife. Here countries have to cooperate. Here countries have to engage in international regimes and try in order to solve that problem. Now again, liberal theory here is the best theory explaining of how countries actually manage to find solutions to collective bads. Now if you look in the United States, if you live in Burlington, you have somebody picking up your garbage. You have Burlington police, campus police, looking after your safety. You have, Burlington City Council looking after, local affairs. You have the state government of Vermont taking care of things. And of course, you have the federal government. So all along, you have different authorities dealing with all sorts of public goods, as well as collective bads. Somebody's picking up the garbage. Somebody's looking after your safety. We have streets. We have hospitals. We have universities. There's electricity. There's a power grid. All of this, both public goods and collective bads are being taken care of. Now, we don't have that in international relations. We don't have a global garbage collector. We don't have a global world police, right? Countries are trying to, in a world capitalist system, whether you're looking at realist theory or constructivist theory or liberal theory, countries are still engaged in some sort of process of competing with one another, whether it's economically or politically. And look, if you're looking at global trade, we have these collective bads. We have, a side effect of industrialization and world trade is that we're polluting our oceans, that we're depleting the ozone layer, and countries are emitting greenhouse gases. Now, again, in the book, you will see in the textbook that, Montreal Protocol, the Kyoto Protocol, countries are dealing with these sort of issues. Countries are dealing with collective bads. So we're looking at atmospheric pollution, depletion of the ozone layer, hazardous waste, for example, marine pollution, wildlife. All of these are different aspects of collective bads. And countries are actually trying to deal with that through international regimes. And that's largely how the book also explains you is a free market environmentalism. You engage in that, you have a certain harvesting capacity, you have a certain level of how much you can pollute, how much you can emit, how much you can harvest of a particular resource, of a fish stock, for example. For example, the North Pacific fur regime goes back to the 19th century. That's Canada, Russia. And here it's basically being a state party to the North Pacific fur regime tells you who is allowed to use how much, so the harvesting capacity, and the rate at which it can be used. So it really distributes these sort of capacities, harvesting capacities, to state parties of any of these regimes. So it could be here, and that of course is killing seals, it's the North Pacific fur regime. So we've had this over a very long time that humankind, countries have come up with different regimes. Now, let me draw your attention to that particular book. Here you see Collapse, How Societies Choose to Fall and Succeed. And it's written by a geographer, not a political scientist. And he looks at different civilizations in the past. The Eastern Island, Pitcairn, Henderson Islands, Anasazi, American Southwest, the Maya, and the medieval Norse. These are all cases of societies which have gradually lost wealth, power, population, and degrees of social complexity. All of these have reached some sort of climax in their societal progress and status, but because of environmental battered collapse have withered away. Now, for the sake of this lecture, let me just summarize what sort of factors he identified. Deforestation and habitat destruction, soil problems, erosion, salinization, soil fertility losses, water management problems, overhunting, overfishing, effects of introduced species on native species, so bringing in new species, overpopulation, and then increased per capita impact of people, so that that particular territory could no longer absorb all the waste associated with that amount of people. Now, he also identifies 4 new factors that actually is also applicable to contemporary societies. Man-made climate change, buildup of toxins in the environment, energy shortages, and the full human utilization of the Earth's photosynthetic capacity. Now let me just look at 2 cases, looking at the Easter Islands. So there were discovered population colonists, 400 to 900, population max probably around 30,000. At the time when that society collapsed, they had completely deforested all of the trees on the island. So there were 21 different types of trees. Now with that, of course, you lose energy security. You no longer have wood to burn for heating, for cooking. You can no longer build canoes to go fishing on the sea. Eventually, land and seabirds were extinct. By 1400, a sharp population decline, and largely the Easter Island society collapsed. Now, is this a microcosmic parable for planet Earth? Neil Diamond thinks so, the author. Now, again, if you're looking at how curious that must be, you are on the Easter Islands, and you're chopping off the last tree on the island. Surely somebody would have said, excuse me, but this is literally the last tree we're having on this island, and we are just cutting it up. Now go ahead, it'll be fine. Now again, a lot of these trees were used to roll around these fellas you see, and of course that's one of the symbols of the Easter Islands, and that's why they're famous for. Again, that particular symbol here, a lot of power and prestige was associated with building these statues around the island. Now again, Diamond says, the author, that it is actually applicable to what we're seeing right now, because again, right now we know about the pressing issues of environmental collapse which we face as humankind. Yet political and economic elites continue to be invested in the status quo, continue to cling on and ignore the science of global climate change and the pressing nature of global climate change. Another case he's looking at is the Norse settlers. So these were basically Norwegian Vikings, which arrived from Norway in Greenland around 980. They brought their own livestock, their own plants. They had some initial success at recreating what they had in Norway, but it turns out that Greenland was incredibly cold, a lot colder than Norway, and really couldn't grow much other than hay for the animals. So they were really living on a very high protein diet, living on milk, cheese and meat. They flourished for some time, reached about 5,000 as the population max, but then again withered away, largely because Greenland got a lot colder too. So those ice age, climate historians refer to as the Little Ice Age. The Norse could not adapt, and the last of them died in the 1430s. Again, a lot had to be, a lot of buildings were being constructed, and there was associated looking churches, smaller castles, bigger buildings. A lot of prestige and power again was associated with building these particular buildings. Sorry. Again, you can see the similarity to the Easter Islands with regards to investing in these sort of prestige symbols at the expense of actually sustainable living. Now again, critics say, well, contemporary societies really have a capacity to collect, assess and distribute information, and have also the means to change. We have the technology, we have research and development, and we can substitute ingenuity for raw materials. So again, critics say this isn't really, that might have happened in the past, but environmental problems are still within our reach and abilities to solve. Now again, the author here, Diamond, does not suggest that problems today are beyond our capacity to solve, but the key difference, greater population and the forces of globalization, make today's society still more vulnerable to ecologically abetted collapse. So again, this is still, we are not safe from what happened in previous civilizations. Now again, if you look in these countries, some of you have had these countries as case analysis. All of these countries have had some sort of environmental collapse in it. So again, these countries have experienced different political turmoils, economic hardship, but all of these countries have also experienced environmental collapse in one way or the other. And these countries are the top 10 of failing societies, failing states, and very dangerous places to live, and very miserable places to live for the most part. Now, if you're looking at the stats of environmental collapse, so again, the fossil fuel of the last 200 years is really unsustainable. Contemporary politics, the economy, and culture really, particularly the United States, is built around cheap and abundant energy. Human population uses about 15 times as much energy as a century ago, and we are very, very vulnerable on our dependency on cheap fossil fuel. In particular, in the United States, if you're looking at the US, represents about 5% of the world's population, using 45% of world energy. Humankind also uses about 10 times as much fresh water as a century ago, and the capacity of the natural world to absorb these sort of shocks and recover is certainly impaired. Now, the question is whether contemporary societies can avoid the rigidities that undermined East Islanders, the Greenland Norse, the Maya in South America, and other civilizations which have experienced this societal collapse because of environmental decay. Now again, a similarity still is that the conduct of political and economic elites we have today, they're still invested in perpetuating current arrangements. Again, this is very evident right now with the current administration here in the United States, particularly with the hollowing out of the Environmental Protection Agency by vested interests of coal and other hydrocarbon industries. So again, they are certainly invested in maintaining the status quo, in trying to avoid renewable energies as much as possible. So again, we see the reasons as short-sighted self-interest, ideological lock-in. We may cling to the status quo. We know about the ingenuity of renewable energies, of resources, how we can achieve that, but we do cling, so elites continue to cling on to the status quo. He says humankind has become the aristocracy of the biosphere. We are living a privileged life at the expense of other creatures. And the demand here is a focus on the role of ecological vulnerability in societal declines and collapses, and demand the use of wisdom, restraint, and flexibility in sidestepping them. So this is really the parable which the author Diamond uses from previous societies, how they collapsed because elites, political, religious, and economic elites clung to the status quo and refused to change. Now, part of the assignment for this week deals with that, deals with what I just told you about, whether we can actually use this these past cases of societal collapse to contemporary humankind, and also have some more questions on the textbooks.